My son called me at 2 in the morning, and I knew from the first syllable that something had gone wrong. I was in Savannah, Georgia, staying with my younger sister for the week. We'd been sitting on her back porch earlier that evening, drinking sweet tea and watching the fireflies come out over the garden, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt, how far away from trouble I was. I should have known better. Trouble has a way of finding you no matter where you are, especially when it involves someone who has been looking for an opening for a very long time. Dad. My son David's voice was barely above a whisper. She's at the house. Mom's house. She went there tonight with a real estate agent. And I think, Dad, I think she's trying to list it. I sat up slowly in the guest bed. I set my feet on the cool hardwood floor. I did not panic. I had been waiting for something like this for almost 3 years, which meant I had also been preparing for it. Is she still there? I asked. I don't know. I found out because my cousin Marcus saw her car parked out front and texted me. He said there were 2 other people with her, a man and a woman, both carrying folders. All right, I said. Go back to sleep, son. Dad, I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly, I told him. Go back to sleep. I'll handle it. And I would, because everything Vanessa thought she was about to do had already been made impossible. She just didn't know that yet. Let me tell you about my son David. He is 34 years old, a second-year resident at a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina, which means he works 90 hours a week and falls asleep in chairs and has not had a full night of rest since before the pandemic. He has his mother's eyes, deep brown, serious, the kind of eyes that make people trust him before he said a word. And he has her stubbornness too, which I say with love. My wife Eleanor passed away 4 years ago from a stroke that came without warning on a Tuesday morning in November. She was 61 years old. She had been planning to retire the following spring. David was devastated. We both were. But grief does strange things to people, and what it did to David was make him desperate for the feeling of home, for warmth, for someone to come back to. I understood that. I did not judge him for it. What I judged was Vanessa. He met her 8 months after Eleanor died at a fundraising gala for the hospital. She was 31, worked in pharmaceutical sales, and was, I will be honest, strikingly beautiful. She had a smile that filled a room and a laugh that made people lean toward her. On the surface, she was charming and accomplished and devoted to my son. But I am 67 years old. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, the son of a man who worked the same factory floor for 31 years and never once complained about it, and the grandson of a woman who kept her family's money sewn into the lining of a winter coat because she did not trust banks or the people who ran them. I come from people who learned, across generations, to watch carefully and to take nothing at face value. And from the very first dinner I had with Vanessa, a Sunday roast at David's apartment in Charlotte, just the 3 of us, something told me to watch carefully. It was not one thing. It was a collection of small things, the way a mosaic is built from pieces, too small to mean much on their own. It was the way her eyes moved around David's apartment, taking quiet inventory. The way she laughed a little too warmly when I mentioned the house Eleanor and I had owned in Greensboro for 30 years. The way she asked, in what she probably thought was a casual tone, whether David was the only child, whether I had siblings who might inherit, whether I'd ever thought about downsizing. She asked all of this over pot roast and biscuits, smiling the whole time, and David did not notice a single question. I noticed everyone. My wife Eleanor had grown up in that house in Greensboro. Her parents bought it in 1967, the year before she was born, and she spent her entire childhood in those rooms. When her parents passed, she inherited it, and when we married, it became ours. We raised David there. We replaced the roof twice and the kitchen cabinets once and argued about paint colors for 15 years, and finally repainted the living room a shade of blue that Eleanor said was perfect, and I said looked like the inside of an aquarium. And she laughed until she cried, and I let her keep the color because her laugh was worth more than being right. After Eleanor died, the house sat. I could not bring myself to sell it. I could not bring myself to rent it to strangers either. So I drove down from Charlotte every few weeks to check on it, and I paid the property taxes, and I kept her rose garden alive as best I could, and I left things mostly as she had arranged them. Her weeding chair was still by the window. Her cookbooks were still on the shelf. About 18 months after Eleanor passed, and about 5 months before David met Vanessa, I had a long conversation with my attorney, a woman named Patricia, who had handled Eleanor's estate and who had become something of a trusted advisor to me over the years. We talked about the house, about what I wanted to happen to it, about protecting it from the various ways that things you love can be taken from you. Patricia drew up the paperwork. The house was transferred into an LLC. David did not know. I had not told him, because there was nothing to tell at the time. The house was mine to manage as I saw fit, and I had simply chosen to manage it carefully. A man who lived through the things my father lived through, who watched what happened to black families in this country when they built something and failed to protect it properly, does not leave his assets exposed out of convenience or sentiment. I was not thinking about Vanessa when I did it. Vanessa did not exist in my life yet. But preparation is not always about the specific threat. Sometimes it is simply about being ready. David proposed to Vanessa 14 months after they met. I was not surprised. I was not pleased either. But I was not surprised. He called me the morning after it happened, and I could hear in his voice the kind of happiness that makes a father want to say nothing to complicate it. So I told him congratulations, and I meant it, and then I called Patricia the following Monday, and we had another long conversation. I like to think I was wrong about Vanessa. I hoped I was wrong, but I had watched her for over a year by that point, and the picture had not improved. The questions about the Greensboro house had not stopped. They had simply become more sophisticated. She had moved from casual curiosity to what she probably thought were strategic suggestions. She mentioned during a Christmas dinner that the house was sitting empty and that a property like that in a college town could generate substantial rental income. She forwarded David a Zillow estimate once. I saw it on his phone, though he didn't know I had. That put the house at $420,000. She told her mother during a phone call I was not meant to overhear at David's apartment one Thanksgiving that the house was basically just waiting there, and that David was Eleanor's only child. I am a quiet man. I do not make speeches or issue warnings or make my suspicions known before I have something concrete to act on. I simply listened, and I prepared, and I waited. Patricia and I updated the LLC documents. We established a trust. We made sure that the house and everything connected to it was exactly where we needed it to be. And then I waited some more. The wedding was in September 2 years ago. It was lovely. Vanessa wore a gown that must have cost more than my first car, and she cried during her vows, and David looked at her the way his mother used to say a man should look at his wife, like she was something he could not believe he was allowed to keep. I sat in the front pew and I thought, I hope I am wrong about all of it. For the first several months, I almost convinced myself I was. They moved into a townhouse in a nice part of Charlotte. Vanessa continued her sales job. David continued his residency. They seemed from the outside like a young couple building a life. But then, slowly, things began to shift. David mentioned in passing that Vanessa had been talking about upgrading their living situation once his residency finished, and he started earning an attending physician's salary. He mentioned it the way you mention weather, as a fact of the environment, unremarkable. I did not say what I was thinking. She began pushing, more directly now that she was family, about the Greensboro house. Could they use it as a vacation property? Could David have it put in both their names for estate planning purposes? She said this over Easter dinner while reaching for the sweet potatoes, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. David looked at me with a slightly apologetic expression. I smiled and said I'd think about it. I did not think about it. There was nothing to think about. The house was not David's to give her. The house was the LLC's, and the LLC was mine. What I did instead was call Marcus, Eleanor's nephew, who lived 3 streets away from the Greensboro house and had grown up running in and out of that backyard. I told Marcus to keep an eye on things, to let me know if he ever saw anything unusual, which is why on a warm Wednesday night in April, Marcus texted David the moment he saw Vanessa's car pull up to the house with strangers carrying folders. I drove back from Savannah the next morning. 6 hours, straight up through South Carolina, the windows down and the radio off, just thinking. I had known Vanessa would eventually make a direct move. The indirect approaches had not worked. Every time she raised the subject of the house, I had smiled pleasantly and said something non-committal, and the conversation had moved on. She was smart enough to recognize that she was not making progress, and smart people, when they are also impatient and certain they are entitled to something, eventually stop being subtle. What I had not known was exactly how she would do it. A real estate agent had not been my first guess. It told me she had done some research. She had probably looked at the deed records, seen that the house was held by an LLC rather than in my personal name or David's, and concluded that the LLC was just a tax or liability vehicle, which it was, partly, and that a listed property would force a family conversation that might go her way. She was betting that David would pressure me, that I would not want to disappoint my son, that the money would be tempting enough to override whatever sentimental attachment I had. She had misunderstood the situation in almost every way it was possible to misunderstand it. I called Patricia from the car. She confirmed what I already knew. The LLC was structured such that Vanessa had no standing, no claim, and no path. The house could not be sold without a decision from the LLC's managing member, which was me. An outside real estate agent walking through the property and drawing up a listing meant exactly nothing from a legal standpoint. She can list it on every website in the country, Patricia said. Doesn't make her authorized to sell it. I know, I said. I'm more interested in the conversation this is going to require. How do you want to play it? Honestly, I said, the way I always play it. I arrived in Greensboro at 2 in the afternoon. I had a key, of course. It was my house. And I let myself in through the front door and stood for a moment in the entryway, the way I always do when I come back. The house smelled like cedar and the faint traces of Eleanor's lavender sachets that I had never removed from the closets. The light came through the living room windows, the same way it always had, falling across the blue walls in long gold rectangles. I sat down in Eleanor's chair. I had brought a letter with me. I had written it the night before, in my sister's kitchen, while she sat across from me reading a novel and not asking questions, because she had known me for 67 years and understood that sometimes I needed to work things out with a pen in my hand. The letter was addressed to David. I want to tell you what was in it, because this is the part that people always want to rush past, the legal part, the structure, the chess moves. They want to get to the confrontation. But the letter is what matters most, and it is what I am most proud of. I told my son about the LLC. I told him about the trust. I explained in plain language exactly how the house was structured and why. Not as a way of keeping things from him, but as a way of preserving what his mother had loved and ensuring it could never be lost through carelessness or taken through pressure. I told him that Eleanor and I had talked about this kind of protection in the abstract for years, long before she got sick, and that setting it up after she passed was one of the ways I had found to honor her. I told him that none of this was about Vanessa. I had set the structure up before Vanessa existed in our lives. But I also told him what I had observed. Not accusations, not a list of grievances, but observations. The questions over dinner. The Zillow estimate. The phone call I had overheard at Thanksgiving. The real estate agent appearing at the house on a Wednesday night when I was 6 hours away in Georgia. I told him I loved him without condition, and that I was not asking him to choose. I was asking him to see clearly. I signed it, your father, who has always believed you are capable of more wisdom than you sometimes give yourself credit for. Vanessa arrived at the house at 4:30. She did not know I was there. She had a key David had given her, which I had known about and had not revoked because there was nothing in the house to take and I had wanted to see what she would do with the access. She walked in with her phone to her ear, still in her work clothes, talking to someone about square footage and staging and whether there was potential for an open floor plan. She stopped when she saw me sitting in the living room. To her credit, she recovered quickly. Her expression shifted from surprise to something warm and practiced. "Oh, I didn't know you were back. David said you were in Savannah." "I drove back this morning," I said. I gestured to the chair across from me, Eleanor's old reading chair, the blue one that matched nothing. "Sit down, Vanessa." She sat. She put her phone away. I set the letter on the table between us. "That's for David," I said. "I'd like you to be the one to give it to him. Tonight, if possible." She looked at it. She did not pick it up. "What is it?" "It explains the legal structure of this house," I said. "The LLC, the trust, the chain of ownership. I thought David should understand it clearly. And I thought, given what Marcus saw last night, that now was the right time." There was a silence. I watched her decide how to play it. "I was just exploring options," she said finally, "for the family. This house is just sitting here, and David mentioned David does not have authority over this house," I said gently, not unkindly. "I want to be clear about that so there's no confusion going forward. The house belongs to the LLC. I am the LLC's managing member. That will not change. So you're just going to let it sit here forever?" "I'm going to let it stand here," I said. "There's a difference." She looked at me for a long moment. The warmth had left her face now, and what was underneath it was something colder and more direct. And honestly, I respected it more than the warmth. At least it was real. "You've never liked me," she said. "I don't know you well enough to have formed a settled opinion," I said. "I have concerns. I think you know what they are. David loves me. I know he does. I hope you love him back in a way that's equal to it." I paused. "That letter will tell him everything he needs to know about the house. What he does with the rest of his marriage is between the two of you. I'm not here to break anything up. I'm here to make sure my wife's home is still standing 50 years from now." She picked up the letter. She held it for a moment without looking at it. "What's in the trust?" she asked. Not aggressively, quietly, like someone who had just realized the board had more pieces than she'd accounted for. "Everything that matters," I said. "David called me that evening, 2 hours after I had driven back to my own apartment in Charlotte. He had read the letter. There was a long silence on the phone before he spoke. Not angry silence. Something more complicated than that. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "About the house?" About all of it. The LLC, the trust, the things you noticed. Because you were grieving, I said. And then you were in love. Those are not good times to hear hard things. And now? Now you're a man who's been married for 2 years, and you're about to finish your residency and step into the rest of your life, I said. Now is exactly the right time. He was quiet again. She was trying to list Mom's house, he said. It wasn't a question. It was him saying it out loud for himself, the way you sometimes have to say a thing out loud before it fully becomes real. That appears to be what was happening, yes. Did she know it wasn't mine to sell? I think she believed she could create enough pressure to make it a moot point, I said. I think she believed I would not want to disappoint you. He exhaled slowly. I'm sorry, Dad. You don't have anything to apologize for. You loved someone. That's not a thing to apologize for. What do I do now? And this is the question I have been thinking about since I sat down in my sister's guest room at 2 a.m. with my feet on the floor. This is the question I do not think I have the right to answer for him. He is his own man, my son, with his mother's eyes and his mother's stubbornness, and whatever he decides will be his to live with, not mine. That's not a question I can answer, I told him. But I will say this. Your mother used to say that the clearest test of whether someone loves you is whether they protect what you love, or whether they try to take it. Not the house, specifically. What the house means. The people who lived in it. The memories stored in those walls. I paused. Think about which category you're dealing with. He called me 3 days later to tell me he and Vanessa were starting couples counseling. I told him I was glad, and I meant it, because I am not a man who wants my son's marriage to fail. I am a man who wanted my son to see clearly, and whatever comes next, whether they find their way back to each other or whether they find their way apart, at least now he is walking into it with his eyes open. That is all a father can ever really give. Eleanor's rose garden bloomed early that year. I drove down to Greensboro in May and spent a Saturday morning trimming the canes and pulling weeds and adding the bone meal that Eleanor always swore by, even though I still could not remember the exact amounts and had to call my sister twice for guidance. The blue walls in the living room still looked like the inside of an aquarium. I had repainted the kitchen. Finally, while Eleanor was alive, she had always wanted a warm yellow in there, and I had dragged my feet for 15 years because I was stubborn about kitchens, and I figured it was about time. I sat in her chair before I left and looked at the room for a while. She would have handled all of this differently than I did. She was better with people than I am, more direct, less patient with circling around a problem. She would have sat Vanessa down much earlier and had a plain conversation, and either the girl would have risen to the occasion or she wouldn't have, and Eleanor would have known which within 20 minutes. But she also trusted me to handle things in my own way, and she knew that my way was slower and quieter, and required more setup than most people expected. She used to say I thought like an engineer, even when I was doing something that had nothing to do with engineering, that I was always building a structure before I started building a house. She was right. She was almost always right. The house is still ours. It will stay ours. And someday when David is ready, when he has become the kind of man who understands what it means to hold something carefully, I will transfer it to him, and he will take care of it the way his mother would have wanted. Until then, I will keep tending the garden and checking the windows and paying the taxes and leaving her cookbooks on the shelf. Because some things are worth protecting. Because some things you do not let go of, simply because someone else wants them badly enough to show up at the door with a folder. Because love is not the house. But sometimes the house is how you know who loves you.